Claudiu. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited to hear your insights and expertise for high school students looking to get on track for their career paths. So tell us about your occupation and which certificates you had to acquire to get where you are today.
Well, hello there, and thanks for having me on the show. It's great to be here. I appreciate your sending the questions ahead of time, and I really think these are great questions. So I hope everyone watching will stick around for all 7 of them, or at least for the 7 answers that are to follow. Your question regarding certifications is a good one. There are 2 aspects to it. One is the fact that there are so many certifications, and we need to understand what these things are for. What's a certification for? Well, we're talking about cybersecurity, so everything has to do with how much you trust the professional who's doing the job. If you're going to give access to sensitive information or to your systems or to your staff or your premises to someone, you better be able to trust them. So you want the professionals, the cybersecurity guys that are going to do the work. And by cybersecurity guys, I mean gals, I mean everyone. You want to be able to trust these people, and certifications are the way to go. At the current moment, people don't check your high school diploma or your university diploma to see if you're qualified. What they check is whether you have a current certification that identifies you as a security professional, a privacy professional, business continuity, or an information protection professional. And those certifications, they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. Some of them just take a couple of days to study for, and others can take up to 6 years to study for. Some of the exams are half an hour, others are more than 4 hours. And so it varies. But what I recommend is to take the entry-level certifications from a variety of organizations and just to see what the questions are like. You don't have to take the exams. You just have a look at, for example, an organization called ISC Square. They have a brand new entry-level certification for security. Have a look at it, read up on it, understand how long the exam is, and that will already give you an idea of the kind of stuff that you need to know as a security professional in order to be useful to someone, because that's really the key. A lot of people come to me and they say, how can I do some cyber? And I say, well, that depends on what you would like to contribute, because you need to be useful to someone. So whether you're going to a company to work inside the organization so that you can secure them from within, or work from outside a company so that you can evaluate the security of multiple firms and organizations, that's up to you. What you need to do is to make sure that you are up to speed with the standards, with the legislation, and with the skill sets that you need to have as a security person. And all of that stuff sounds a lot more boring than it is. Security is a tremendous amount of fun. I'm glad that you're all interested in it. I think you're going to love it. There's a little bit for everyone to enjoy in security, whether you like the research bit, or whether you like the hacking bit, or whether you like the teaching bit. So let's talk about that.
Which aspect of your job never bores you?
You know what? Most of what I do is not boring at all. Now, a couple of caveats. I do so many different things that it's very difficult for me to get bored. What I try to stay away from is multitasking. Multitasking is a productivity killer. It splits you up. It splits up your time into many different slices, and you tend to be drained of energy, of mental energy. So what I recommend is sticking to one thing. So when you're doing an interview like this one, you're present. You're doing that interview. I'm not checking my emails. I'm not looking at my chat window. I'm not monitoring my systems. I'm talking to you, and that's super fun. Another thing that's super fun is really working on doing enough research so that you can understand a computer system or a company um, or a business in general that is in a particular space. And so when you're working with a company, you need to understand first what they do, and then you need to understand why someone might want to hack them. In some cases, you literally will find that some companies have no natural predators, as they say on the Discovery Channel. And so in those cases, you can simply look at the stuff they depend on. What do companies depend on? Well, a lot of them depend on information. So unless you're a hot dog stand, there's going to be some information that if you lose it, it's going to impact your bottom line. And that's when security people come in. That's when cybersecurity is important. What are the different ways that the information could be damaged? Can it be damaged accidentally? You bet. Can somebody internal have a grudge and intentionally either steal it or delete it or share it? Sure, that might happen. Most people internally are trustworthy. Can somebody outside the organization find a way in? Well, that gets a lot more fun as you think about it. So identifying a variety of threats and figuring out what the chance of each one happening, that's called a threat risk analysis. So try to think about the potential and think of the potential as a probability. That probability is your risk. And if you take that kind of thinking to the rest of your life, everything has a risk to it. There's always a risk that you're going to trip on the stairs as you're walking down or up the stairs. But the chance is low. And some chances are higher, some chances are lower. And that's all there is to thinking from a risk-based perspective. So risk is really everything about life. And if you can adopt that kind of thinking, you're going to make a great security professional.
Speaking of threats and risks, what is the biggest breach you have ever tackled?
Well, so the biggest breaches that I've seen have happened in public. We've seen a ton of spectacular, I mean, just monumental breaches that have been documented widely. And I'm lucky enough that the media calls me once in a while and they say, hey, could you comment on this on TV or on the radio? So I have to maintain some degree of knowledge about these breaches. I have to understand them. I need to be able to summarize what matters, and I need to be able to explain it in 20 seconds. And that's also fun because you need to understand how this thing happened. You need to understand the fact that literally the next question that you're going to be asked is, well, what tips do you have, Claudiu, for preventing this kind of thing? Because our listeners care about how they can avoid this happening to them. So one of my favorite, and I say favorite because it was a bad thing, one of my most memorable breaches is the one that happened to Sony about, I want to say about 11, 12 years ago, where employees kept warning management that they had no security internally. They had a little text file on the network called passwords.txt where everyone could help themselves to it. They had systems that were not being monitored. Sometimes they slowed down, sometimes they didn't. No one paid attention to it. And then one day they came to work and they saw this skull on their screens. And you can literally pull up that skull if you go into Google Images and type in Sony breach. Well, that was an early example of ransomware. Ransomware today is everywhere. People's computers get locked up, and then some criminal pops up and says, hey, you're going to need to pay me money in order to get your computer back. In those days, it was monumental. These guys had spent 9 months to a year, these criminals, they had spent all this time stealing data from Sony. They stole a whole bunch of movies. They stole internal information. They stole internal emails, which have embarrassed the company because some of them were just inappropriate. And all of that stuff ended up being public. And it created an example of what not to do, how not to behave, how to secure your system so you can prevent that kind of thing, but also what is okay to be talking about internally on email systems within a company. So when we talk about cybersecurity, we also talk about communications. When I talk about privacy and compliance, I also advise organizations on what kind of information should be communicated within enterprises, within businesses, so that if and when there's a data breach, the organization is not hugely embarrassed and the brand doesn't suffer and the credibility of the whole thing does not crumble. So you see, the job of a security professional is not just to hack things because it's fun, to break them and then say, haha, I broke it. The job of a cybersecurity professional is to anticipate the various risks that come from different practices, which may be bad for the company. And in some cases, companies don't know that they're doing something that could be spectacularly embarrassing until they get embarrassed by it. In this case, it happened. It was a terrible thing. It affected the organization in many ways. And unfortunately, it also affected the staff, because a lot of people whose personal information was stolen from human resources got victimized as a result. And so the lessons to be learned from that type of breach are many. And that's why I always recommend to people when they're doing their own research, and if they really care about getting into the space, they should really research it themselves. Don't wait until somebody spoon feeds it to you. Do your own Google searches. Learn about how it unfolded. How did it start? How did it end? What was the impact short term? What was the impact long term? And then you will understand the kinds of things that your audience cares about, so that, again, you can be useful to someone within this sector. So that was an excellent question again.
That was great advice. That was very interesting to hear about. Is there anything you did differently or you would do differently to ensure the task was done efficiently?
So one of the things that a cybersecurity professional does is they don't just bark advice at people and say, hey, you should use longer passwords and make sure you don't reuse that password and, I don't know, get a firewall and antivirus something or other. The most effective way to be participating as someone who contributes to the profession is to understand that if you're the security expert, the other people are not likely to be the security experts. Therefore, they rely on you to do some hand-holding. And one of the things that I do is I have regular meetings with every single client to make sure that some of the recommendations that I brought are being taken care of, that they are not confusing, that they are not forgotten, and that they actually make sense. Because in some cases, you can make a recommendation and walk away, and nobody understands what you mean. So having that ongoing dialogue is really important. And that ongoing dialogue, it matters whether you are in a corporate setting inside a business, or whether you're a consultant advising an organization, or whether you're in your own family and you're advising grandma and you just told her not to click on things and you left her. You need to come back and make sure and say, and call her in a couple of days and say, hey, grandma, did you ever receive emails like those again that we talked about? Did you receive ones that are somewhat different? Do you see the difference between them? Did you have any questions? Is there anything else I can help with? Is it confusing when the email is worded differently? So having that dialogue with whoever your audience is is absolutely critical if you're a security person, because if you don't have that dialogue, you are not useful to them. They can find tips online. They can literally Google security tips, and they'll come up with thousands of security tips and walk away with those security tips. That's not going to be helpful to most people. What matters is the human connection that you have with your audience and how much knowledge you can transfer to them, as we're doing here today.
With regards to everything evolving and always changing pace in the field of cybersecurity, what are your thoughts on how fast AI is evolving and how does it impact cybersecurity?
Well, I'm old enough to say that AI as a word, as a term, has been around my entire life. But for the vast majority of my life, it was initially part of science fiction books, and then it was part of pure theory, and then it was just something amusing to talk about, and suddenly here it is, we're writing essays and we're using it to create images that have never existed before, and we're using it to compose music and create new fake Tom Cruise videos and a whole bunch of stuff. So it's evolved enormously, and it's expected to double or triple in power every few months, which means a year from now, we're looking at an entirely different AI landscape. And what AI is going to do a year from now is going to be almost unimaginable to us today. So even today, you can make movies with AI, you can make music, etc. In a year, my only concern with AI is not that it's going to get control over nuclear weapons. My concern about AI is that people will depend on it too much. And once you start depending on something too much, you tend to allow it to take over certain brain functions. And if you depend on it to write your essays, well, then you might forget how to write essays. It's the same idea that parents had when I was young and we had calculators. And they said, well, if you're going to use a calculator, you're going to forget how to do multiplication. Well, multiplication is not necessarily something that I need to do by hand all the time. If I have 100 things to calculate, I'm going to use a calculator. It's the same thing with AI. In many cases, it's going to multiply our productivity. In other cases, it might reduce our personal competencies. And so we need to be a little bit concerned about that because, for example, if people apply to a company and they look amazing on paper, and then you're presented with an individual who seems to be completely different from the resume that they've submitted, then we need to be suspicious. And so we need today to create safeguards and controls to identify and prevent those aspects of AI that we don't want. The aspects of AI that we do want should be emphasized and should be regulated so that they don't go off the rails, so that we never depend 100% on it, but so that we can multiply our productivity and our work. And it can also serve us in our lives to maybe not be so overwhelmed with the vast amounts of work that we have to do if we can simply systematize something and allow it to work for us. I definitely recommend to all of our viewers that they keep an eye on AI, in particular within the topic of security. I have a discussion group on LinkedIn, for example, called Cybersecurity and AI. And that's where anyone can post interesting articles and have interesting discussions about the evolution of this technology as it pertains to the protection of people and data. So it's a topic that we can talk about for days, and in those days it will evolve. So it's a fascinating thing. I encourage everyone to stay on top of it because it's not going away.
No, that's a great take on it. And even being in university, I've seen how fast everything has changed and how students are using ChatGPT and all of these different resources to do their work. So I've definitely seen the change in that as well. Our next question is, what advice would you give a student trying to break into cybersecurity field today?
Well, I like the expression break in.
Hmm.
I'm assuming you used it intentionally. The idea for someone to break into cybersecurity is to focus on understanding the fundamental principles. Um, all too often, I get people who say, "You're doing something so cool. I really want to get into that hacking thing. Let's just hack. I just want to break stuff." And yeah, it can be fun to break stuff, but it's also illegal. It's unethical, and ultimately, it's unhelpful because unless you understand additional aspects of work, such as project management, for instance, so that you can identify different tasks as individual projects, then you're just bound to be a bull in a china shop, and no one finds that useful. You need to demonstrate that you understand how you manage risk. So, for example, there is a risk to being in security, and that risk is that if you are given tools for doing your work, you might break things inadvertently and cause more damage than you're trying to prevent. So the first thing that you need to do when you're going into security is to understand the various domains of security. For example, um, practically any certification that you're about to look up as a result of this interview is going to have a number of bullet points. Read those bullet points. Those bullet points are the different areas of security. There's network security, there's application security, there's system security. Physical security is often forgotten. There's people, there's process, there's technology, there's administrative security and IT security, and all kinds of other facets of protection which wrap around something valuable. So understand what that is that's valuable. Understand what an asset is. An asset can be an employee. It could be the information inside the employee's head. It could be the information that's in the cloud or on a hard drive. The security is what's wrapped around those assets. One of those things will appeal to you more than the others, and so on. And if a number of these things appeal to you, then you have the makings of someone who could start working on a certification. Because the difference between certified professionals and uncertified professionals is huge. And it goes like this. If you are a passionate individual, you might just say, well, you know what, I'm just going to go out there and start doing the security thing. And by doing the security thing, you're doing what you enjoy, but you don't know what you're missing because you don't know all the domains, all the parts. There is a finite number of buckets of information that go into your knowledge of a particular domain and of a particular profession. By doing your certification, you are proving to a client or to an employer that you understand all aspects of your profession. And that is what separates an amateur from a professional. And that's what separates one type of expert from another. It doesn't mean that people who don't have certifications don't know what they're doing. It usually indicates that if someone is not certified, they've just been doing the exact same thing over years and they've gotten quite good at it. But that also means that there's a whole bunch of stuff that they don't know about. And employers have no way of knowing what applicants don't know about, except to ask for a professional certification. So the way to break into the profession is to select a few areas of security that you enjoy and learn about them, usually by example, just like looking up the Sony data breach and building up your building up your competencies and your capabilities in those areas, and seeing if anyone will let you take a crack at it, or obviously practice on your own. And once you develop some of those skills, you could go for one of those simple certifications to get. It will deliver a lot of value to you, in particular from the perspective of having the confidence that you belong in the business. So that's another excellent question.
That is definitely some great advice that I think high school students will take in how they can break into the field of cybersecurity. And for our last question, we have, as technology is continuously advancing, how do you stay updated on the latest cybersecurity threats and trends?
That's another excellent question. I'm glad you asked it, because a lot of people that I see within IT or within technology in general, they pick up their hat at the end of the day and they go home, and that's it. Real security professionals are not necessarily all about security. They're about risk, and where they see risk, they see opportunity, and those opportunities are usually opportunities for learning. So you necessarily need to understand so much more in order to be an effective security professional. You need to understand about human communication, human psychology. You need to understand how businesses work. You need to understand politics. You need to understand technology fundamentally. You need to understand how businesses make money, because that's how they deliver value. So if that value chain is cut off, then they're going to be impacted. And then you realize so many headlines, news headlines, have to do with risk and security, that you'll become a machine for absorbing information, an information junkie, I like to say. You don't have to be addicted to the information, but you need to be able to synthesize it and assimilate it in a way that's useful to you. So 2 suggestions. 1, write stuff down. Even better, start a blog. Write down your thoughts, chart the course of your professional development, explain to people how you're moving towards your certification, how you are doing better with your understanding of security, or just some of the stuff that some of the projects that you're involved in. It helps to be able to articulate things, it helps to be able to write things, it helps to be able to present things, because you need to be a communicator. Secondly, you need to stay on top of the news that matter, and you need to be able to discern between misinformation and real quality information. So the first thing you do is to filter the news. And Google has a really neat mechanism. If you go and do a search for news, you're able to create a Google alert. And by creating a Google alert, you can type in a couple of keywords, and based on those keywords, Google will send you news headlines as they come out, and you'll receive them as often as you want. It'll ask you how often you want to receive these things, and you sit down and you read them, and if they give you good ideas, you go back and you write something, or you create a presentation, or you improve your resume as a result. But either way, don't think of it as a 9-to-5 job. This is a way of life. You thinking like a risk professional will be defining the rest of your life. And if you can help to secure an organization from within or from outside, then that's value. That is a contribution that you can make that other people would not be able to do if you didn't follow those same steps. So you'll notice that I didn't say you're going to leverage all the good education that you have from school. You will need that education. You need to stay in school. You need to get your degree. But you need to do so much more than that in order to be able to deliver value in the real world, for one major reason. The real world is now changing every year. as we discussed, not just because of AI, but because of innovation in general, and because of geopolitics, and because of how the economy is doing, especially now after we came out of a pandemic. So you need to stay on top of things every day, and you need to have fun. So if you're not passionate about it, maybe cybersecurity is not for you. But if you are passionate about it, then there's an entire world for you to enjoy right here. So thanks for those questions. They were fantastic.
Thank you for all your time and advice, Claudiu. It will surely help many high school students to solidify their career decisions.
My pleasure. Good luck to everyone.